When the geopolitical tectonic plates began shifting irreversibly a few years ago, the mainstream analytical community made a fatal error. They measured the shifting balance of global power using the metrics of the 20th century. They counted aircraft carriers, they tallied defense budgets, and they drew lines on maps to show territorial gains or losses in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. Months ago, I stated that these traditional metrics were becoming obsolete. I predicted that the nature of the conflict was transforming. Those predictions have now materialized. But what we are witnessing today, in the daily headlines, the kinetic strikes, the diplomatic summits, the endless debates over military aid packages, is largely a distraction. It is the visible smoke from a fire, but it is not the fuel. While the world's attention remains entirely transfixed on the smoke, a far more devastating, systemic collapse is quietly accelerating beneath the surface. It is a structural implosion that Western foreign policy establishments are either entirely blind to or willfully ignoring because the reality is simply too terrifying to acknowledge. Today, we are moving past the daily news cycle. We are applying the analytical framework of Professor Sayed Mohammed Marandi to uncover the terminal trajectory of the current global order. I am going to outline my next major prediction, the collapse no one is talking about. This is not a sudden military defeat. It is the catastrophic, mathematically inevitable failure of the economic and logistical foundations that have maintained the unipolar world for the last 4 decades. And by the time the broader public realizes what has happened, the architecture of global power will have already been permanently rewritten. To understand the nature of this impending collapse, we must first examine the battlefield not as a clash of armies, but as an equation of attrition. For decades, the West held a monopoly on power projection. They possessed the ability to intervene anywhere on the globe with overwhelming, asymmetric force, facing minimal risk to their own structural integrity. That era is definitively over. We have entered the era of the logistics trap. Let us look closely at the maritime choke points, specifically the Red Sea, the Bab el Mandeb Strait, and the Strait of Hormuz. We are witnessing a revolution in military affairs that fundamentally neutralizes the multi-billion-dollar naval assets of the reigning hegemon. Non-state actors and regional powers have successfully deployed cheap, mass-produced drones, loitering munitions, and anti-ship ballistic missiles to enforce sea denial. This is not merely a tactical nuisance, it is a strategic catastrophe for the West. Consider the mathematics of this engagement. An Allied destroyer is forced to intercept a $20,000 drone with a $2 million interceptor missile. The Western military industrial complex is designed for high tech, low volume production, maximizing profit margins for defense contractors. It is utterly incapable of sustaining a high intensity, high volume war of attrition. The adversaries of the unipolar order understand this perfectly. They are not trying to sink the entire fleet in a single, decisive battle. They are bleeding the Empire's treasury and depleting its magazines in an unwinnable, indefinite defensive posture. Every day that global shipping is forced to reroute around the Cape of Good Hope, the cost of Western goods rises. Every interceptor missile fired is a localized economic defeat. The collapse begins here, in the physical degradation of supply chains. The West is currently expending its finite resources to protect an outdated system of global maritime control that it can no longer technologically or financially guarantee. It is a slow, methodical exhaustion of military readiness that the mainstream media writes off as localized skirmishes. It is nothing of the sort. It is the deliberate dismantling of Western deterrence. However, the military overstretch is merely the symptom. The disease, the fatal flaw that ensures this collapse is irreversible, lies within the global financial system. The ultimate source of Western hegemony was never truly its military. It was the supreme, unquestioned dominance of the US dollar and the control over global financial plumbing, such as the SWIFT network. The ability to dictate terms, levy devastating economic sanctions, and freeze the assets of non-compliant nations gave the West unparalleled, godlike leverage over the international community. But a critical, historic miscalculation was made. By weaponizing the global financial system to its absolute maximum extent, by freezing hundreds of billions in sovereign reserves of a major nuclear and resource power, a terrifying message was broadcast to every capital outside of NATO. The message was simple and chilling. Your sovereign wealth is only yours as long as you obey. If you step out of line, your national savings will be confiscated. Professor Marandi has astutely noted that sanctions are only a deterrent when the target has nowhere else to go. But what happens when you simultaneously sanction the nations that produce the world's energy, the nations that control the world's rare earth minerals, and the nations that possess the overwhelming majority of the world's industrial manufacturing capacity? You do not isolate them. You force them to coordinate. You force them to build a parallel world. This brings us to the core of my prediction: the rapid, institutional decoupling of the global south from the Western financial architecture. Mainstream Western economists continue to laugh off the idea of de-dollarization. They point to the dollar's current share of global trade and claim it is invincible. They are looking backward, not forward. De-dollarization is not an overnight event. It is a structural phase shift. It is happening right now in the shadows of the global economy. We are seeing the rapid expansion of BRICS. We are seeing major oil producers willingly accepting local currencies. We are witnessing the development of alternative cross-border payment platforms designed entirely outside of Western jurisdiction. Most tellingly, we are seeing central banks across Eurasia and the global south buying physical gold at the most aggressive pace in recorded history, repatriating their reserves and dumping Western treasuries. They are immunizing themselves against the very weapons the West relies upon. Once this parallel financial infrastructure reaches critical mass, and my timeline for this tipping point is within the next 2 to 3 years, the artificial global demand that has propped up the massive, unsustainable debt of the Western nations will abruptly evaporate. As the financial walls close in, we must examine the physical reality of the global economy. Wealth is not created by printing money. Wealth is created by applying energy to raw materials to manufacture goods. Here, the structural collapse is already undeniably visible, particularly on the European continent. For decades, the economic prosperity of Europe was built on a very specific, fragile foundation: cheap, abundant energy from the East, combined with high value manufacturing exports. Geopolitical hubris has permanently shattered this foundation. By severing themselves from their primary, most logical source of affordable energy in an attempt to achieve a geopolitical victory, European leaders have committed economic suicide. This is the energy paradox. You cannot run a globally competitive, advanced industrial economy on expensive, imported, liquefied natural gas shipped across oceans, while your primary economic competitors in Asia are securing long-term, heavily discounted energy pipelines. The result is exactly what we are witnessing now: a profound, structural deindustrialization of the Western world. Heavy industry, chemical production, automotive manufacturing, the very pillars of the middle class economy, are shutting down or relocating to jurisdictions where energy and raw materials are secure and affordable. The West is attempting to transition to a high-tech, green economy while simultaneously alienating the nations that mine the necessary critical minerals and control the refining capacity. It is a strategic paradox that cannot be resolved through political rhetoric. As Professor Marandi frequently highlights, you cannot sanction reality. The Global South holds the tangible assets: the oil, the gas, the minerals, the factories. The West holds the fiat currency and the debt. When the historical correction occurs, tangible assets will always violently reassert their dominance over paper promises. This catastrophic realignment brings us to the most dangerous, volatile phase of the collapse: the domestic blowback. Geopolitics is not merely a theoretical exercise played out by diplomats in Geneva. Geopolitics is the price of fuel at your local station. It is the cost of heating your home in December. It is the purchasing power of your life savings. My prediction stands. Over the next 24 to 36 months, these cascading crises will compound exponentially. The logistics trap will permanently degrade military readiness. The parallel financial architecture will neutralize the weaponization of the dollar, and the resulting domestic economic pain will paralyze Western political leadership. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next analysis.